Merry Christmas.
The city of Gotham was unusually quiet for Christmas Eve. Snow drifted lazily through the air, covering the streets in a soft blanket of white. For once, crime seemed to take a back seat to the holiday, leaving the streets mostly empty. But in Wayne Manor, the grand old mansion perched on the outskirts of the city, the weight of the night was heavier than usual. Bruce Wayne sat in his study, the fire crackling softly in the hearth, as he stared into the flames, lost in thought. His face, usually concealed behind the stoic mask of Batman, was etched with a deep weariness, one that went far beyond physical exhaustion. It was a weariness of the soul. The room around him was steeped in shadows, the grand walls lined with portraits of Wayne ancestors who had lived and died long before his time. But the only portrait Bruce cared about was the one hanging directly above the fireplace, a painting of his parents, Thomas and Martha Wayne. They smiled down at him from the canvas, eternally frozen in time. A reminder of the life that had been ripped away from him so long ago. Bruce couldn't look at the painting for long. It hurt too much. He turned his gaze back to the fire, his thoughts wandering back to the night that had defined his entire existence. The night in Crime Alley when his parents were murdered before his eyes. Every Christmas Eve, the pain felt sharper, the memories harder to bear. Alfred had offered to stay with him, but Bruce had insisted on being alone. He didn't want company tonight. The weight of his dual life as Bruce Wayne and Batman had grown heavier over the years, and tonight it felt as though the weight might finally crush him. Gotham was no better off than it had been when he first put on the cowl. Crime was still rampant. Corruption still seeped through every corner of the city, and the villains, the Joker, Scarecrow, Bane, were relentless. The bat signal had been quiet tonight, but Bruce couldn't shake the feeling that something was coming. His instincts, honed over years of fighting Gotham's worst, told him that tonight wouldn't be peaceful for long. As the clock struck midnight, a sudden, eerie chill filled the room. The temperature dropped rapidly, and the fire in the hearth flickered and dimmed. Bruce's sharp eyes scanned the room, his body tensing instinctively. Something was wrong. He rose from his chair, his muscles coiled, ready for action. But there was no one there. No intruder. No villain lurking in the shadows. Just the soft crackle of the dying fire and the faint hum of the wind outside. Bruce. The voice came from behind him, soft yet clear. It was a voice he hadn't heard in years. Slowly, Bruce turned, his heart pounding in his chest. Standing in the shadows just beyond the flickering firelight was Thomas Wayne. Bruce's breath caught in his throat. His father stood before him, looking just as he had the night he died. Tall, strong, dressed in his familiar coat and hat. But his figure was ghostly, translucent, glowing faintly in the dim light. "Father?" Bruce's voice was barely a whisper. His mind raced, trying to make sense of what he was seeing. This had to be a trick, an illusion, but deep down, Bruce knew it wasn't. This was real. Thomas Wayne stepped forward, his expression gentle, but tinged with sadness. "Bruce, my son, I've come to show you the truth." Bruce's hands clenched into fists, his emotions a swirling storm of disbelief, grief, and anger. How are you here?" Thomas smiled softly, though his eyes held the weight of 1,000 unspoken words. "I've come to guide you. You've lost your way, Bruce. You think you're fighting for justice, for Gotham, but you've become a prisoner of the past. Tonight you'll be visited by 3 spirits. Each will show you something you need to see." Bruce's jaw tightened. "I don't have time for this." "You don't have a choice," Thomas said gently, his form starting to shimmer and blur. "This is the only way. Look to the past, Bruce. See what you need to see." Before Bruce could respond, the room around him dissolved, the shadows swirling together like smoke, until the study vanished entirely. In its place, Bruce found himself standing in a cold, narrow alleyway. The sight sent a jolt of recognition through him. It was Crime Alley. The street was almost exactly as Bruce remembered it, dark, grimy, the distant sounds of Gotham's underbelly echoing in the background. His heart raced as he realized where and when he was. This was the night that changed everything. Standing at the mouth of the alley was a younger version of Bruce, no more than 8 years old, holding his mother's hand. Martha Wayne smiled down at him, her face full of warmth and love. Thomas Wayne stood beside them, tall and strong, his hand resting on Bruce's shoulder. Bruce felt his chest tighten as he watched his younger self. So small, so innocent, so unaware of what was about to happen. The pain of that night still haunted him, even after all these years. "Why are you showing me this?" Bruce demanded, his voice harsh. "I already know what happened." Thomas appeared beside him, his ghostly form watching the scene with the same sadness Bruce felt. "This moment defines you, Bruce. You've spent your entire life trying to escape it, trying to fix the pain by becoming Batman. But no matter how many criminals you stop, no matter how much justice you seek, you're still here, trapped in this alley." Bruce's fist clenched. "I fight so that no one else has to go through this. I fight for Gotham." "But you're not free, Bruce," Thomas said softly. "You fight for Gotham, but you've never let go of this night. It holds you prisoner." The scene unfolded just as Bruce knew it would. He watched, helpless, as Joe Chill stepped out of the shadows, his gun gleaming under the dim streetlight. He saw the fear flash in his mother's eyes, saw the protective way his father stepped in front of him, and then he heard the gunshot. It was the same every time. The sound of the gun, the sight of his parents falling to the ground, their blood pooling on the cold pavement. Bruce had seen it over and over in his nightmares, but watching it now as an outsider was somehow even more painful. Young Bruce knelt beside his parents, his small hands shaking as he reached out to them, tears streaming down his face. The grief and terror in his eyes were almost too much for the older Bruce to bear. Thomas turned to Bruce, his expression filled with a sorrow that mirrored Bruce's own. "You became Batman to fight against this pain, but Batman can't fix everything." Bruce's voice was tight, barely controlled. "I have to try." "You've sacrificed so much," Thomas said gently. "But there's more to life than vengeance, Bruce. There's more than Batman. You can't change the past, but you can shape the future." The scene began to blur, the dark alley and the echoes of gunfire fading into a soft haze. Bruce's heart ached as the memory slipped away, the weight of his father's words heavy in his mind. As the world around him began to shift again, Thomas's voice echoed in the distance. "I'm only the first, Bruce. The others will show you what you've been missing." The world around Bruce had shifted once again. The grim alley of his had passed. He stood dissolving into shadows. His heart still ached from the painful memory of his parents' death, but there was no time to dwell on it. The firelight of Wayne Manor flickered back into existence, bringing him back to the cold, empty study where it had all begun. But the air was different now, thick with tension and a chill that crawled under his skin. The clock struck again. The deep chime echoed through the manor like a death knell, reverberating in Bruce's chest. Midnight. Suddenly, a sharp, mocking voice pierced the silence. "Well, well, well, if it isn't old Batsy himself feeling all sentimental on Christmas Eve." Bruce's entire body tensed, his muscles coiled and ready for a fight. He recognized that voice. He'd know it anywhere. "Joker," Bruce growled, his voice low and filled with controlled anger. Out of the shadows of the study stepped the unmistakable figure of the Joker. But this wasn't the flesh and blood version Bruce had battled countless times in Gotham's streets. This Joker was different, translucent, glowing faintly, just as his father had been. But unlike Thomas Wayne's ghost, this spirit radiated a chaotic, malevolent energy. Joker twirled a candy cane between his gloved fingers. His face split into that familiar maniacal grin as he sauntered forward. He was dressed in a garish Santa suit, the bright red contrasting sharply with his pale, painted face. The sight was grotesque, a twisted mockery of Christmas cheer. "Merry Christmas, Bats," Joker cackled, his laughter filling the room with an unsettling echo. "Oh, I love what you've done with the place. Very dark, very brooding. But you know, Christmas is a time for joy, for giving." His grin widened. "And tonight, I'm here to give you the gift of truth." Bruce narrowed his eyes, his fists clenched at his sides. "You're not real. You're just a figment of my imagination." "Oh, Bats, don't be so dull," Joker pouted, stepping closer. "I'm as real as any Christmas spirit can be, and tonight I'm your very own ghost of Christmas present. Ho, ho, ho." Bruce didn't respond, but his gaze was fixed on Joker, watching every movement. "You know how this works, don't you, Batsy?" Joker continued, his voice sing-song. "I'm here to show you the present, the Gotham you've built with all your heroic little escapades. Come on, let's take a stroll down memory lane." Before Bruce could react, the room around him shifted once more. The walls of Wayne Manor dissolved into nothingness, and in an instant, they were standing in the heart of Gotham City. But this wasn't the Gotham Bruce wanted to see. The streets were in chaos. Fires burned in the distance, casting an ominous orange glow over the snow-covered roads. Buildings were crumbling, their windows shattered, and screams echoed faintly in the cold night air. It was a vision of Gotham in its worst state, teetering on the edge of destruction, its people scrambling to survive. Bruce's heart sank as he looked around, the weight of the city's suffering pressing down on him. "This can't be real," he muttered. Joker sidled up next to him, grinning ear to ear. "Oh, it's very real, Bats. This is your Gotham, your Christmas present. You fight so hard to keep this city from falling apart, but look at it. It's a mess, and it's all because of you." Bruce's fists clenched. "That's not true." "Oh, isn't it?" Joker chuckled. He waved his hand, and the scene shifted slightly. Now they were standing in front of Gotham General Hospital, its doors flung wide open. Inside, doctors and nurses rushed frantically to tend to the wounded, victims of the latest round of Gotham's endless crime spree. "Take a look," Joker sneered, pointing toward the emergency room. "These are the people you're saving, Bats. All those poor souls who get caught in the crossfire. They're suffering because of your crusade. Gotham's criminals. They're not afraid of you. They thrive in your chaos." Bruce's gaze followed Joker's gesture, his stomach tightening as he saw the flood of patients inside the hospital. People he had sworn to protect, broken and bleeding because Gotham had become a battleground. Joker leaned in close, whispering in Bruce's ear, "You think you're Gotham's savior, but the truth is, you've only made things worse." The scene shifted again, and now they stood outside a crumbling apartment building, its walls tagged with graffiti and its windows boarded up. Bruce recognized it immediately. Crime Alley. The same place where his parents had died all those years ago, but this time, it wasn't just the memory of his parents that haunted the place. A group of Gotham's poorest citizens huddled in the cold, their faces gaunt with hunger, their clothes threadbare and worn. Children sat in the snow shivering as their parents searched for scraps of food or warmth. Bruce's chest tightened with anger and sorrow. He had spent years trying to lift Gotham out of poverty, trying to give these people a better life. But here they were, suffering just as they always had. "You can't fix it all, Bats," Joker said, his tone mockingly sympathetic. "No matter how many bad guys you lock up, no matter how many nights you spend beating up thugs, Gotham will always be a cesspool of misery. It's a joke, really." Bruce turned to Joker, his voice a low growl. "Enough." But Joker wasn't finished. He waved his hand once more, and the scene changed again, faster this time. They were now inside GCPD headquarters, where Commissioner Gordon sat, hunched over his desk, his face drawn with exhaustion. Papers were scattered across his desk, files detailing Gotham's never-ending string of crimes. Gordon rubbed his temples, clearly worn down by the constant weight of his job. It was Christmas Eve, but there was no rest for Gotham's police force. They were drowning in cases, and the pressure was starting to show on Gordon's face. "You see," Joker said, gesturing to Gordon, "even your friends are suffering. Poor old Jim, working himself to death trying to keep up with your little crusade. He's a good man, Bats, but he's cracking under the pressure." Bruce felt a pang of guilt as he watched Gordon shuffle through paperwork, clearly exhausted. It had been months since he'd had a real conversation with Gordon. Batman's work had consumed him so completely that he had distanced himself from even his closest allies. And what about these guys? Joker smirked as the scene shifted once more. Now they were standing on a darkened rooftop, where Nightwing and Robin, Dick Grayson and Tim Drake, were engaged in a brutal fight against a gang of criminals. Both of them moved with precision and skill, but Bruce could see the strain in their movements, the weariness in their eyes. They had been fighting for too long, just like he had. "They've got your back, Bats," Joker said, almost gleeful. "But how long can they keep going? How long before they break under the pressure of your war?" Bruce's heart ached as he watched Dick and Tim struggle to hold their ground. He had trained them, molded them into the heroes they were today. But had he pushed them too far? Had he asked too much of them? "Face it, Bats," Joker continued, his voice low and insidious. "You've built this city on fear, and it's crumbling around you. The people you care about, they're suffering just as much as the people you fight. Maybe more." Bruce's breath came in shallow gasps as he took in the scenes around him. The broken city, the suffering citizens, the worn-down allies. It was too much. Gotham was drowning, and for the first time, Bruce felt like he might be drowning with it. Joker leaned close, his voice a soft, mocking whisper. "You're not a hero, Bats. You're just a man in a mask, pretending you can save the world. But you can't even save yourself." The world began to blur again, the chaotic scenes of Gotham's present dissolving into darkness. But Joker's voice echoed in Bruce's mind, even as everything faded away. "And now, it's time for the final act, the one that really kills." The darkness was complete. Gotham City, its chaotic streets, its broken people, and even the constant presence of crime, all of it had dissolved into an infinite black void. Bruce Wayne stood alone, his heart pounding in his chest. He had faced many enemies in his life, but this felt different. It wasn't just fear he felt, it was dread, the kind of deep, unshakable dread that gnawed at his very soul. Then, out of the blackness came a figure, tall, looming, and wrapped in a cloak as black as night itself. Its face was hidden beneath a hood, but Bruce could feel its presence, a cold, unrelenting force that sent a shiver down his spine. This was not like the other spirits. This was something far older, far darker. The figure raised one skeletal hand, pointing a bony finger directly at Bruce. You must be the ghost of Christmas future," Bruce said, his voice steady despite the terror tightening in his chest. The figure said nothing, but its silent gesture spoke volumes. Without a word, Bruce knew what this spirit represented: death, the final fate awaiting every man, even those who wore the mask of Batman. "Show me then," Bruce said, steeling himself. "Show me what becomes of me. Show me the future of Gotham." Death lowered its hand and stepped aside, revealing a scene that slowly materialized out of the darkness. The void shifted and transformed, and Bruce found himself standing in the heart of Gotham Cemetery. Snow fell in thick, heavy drifts, coating the gravestones in a pale white blanket. The air was cold, but not the kind of cold that simply chilled the body. This was the cold of the grave. Before Bruce could fully comprehend where he was, his eyes landed on a freshly dug grave in the distance. The ground was raw, the earth churned up and unsettled. His breath caught in his throat as he read the name engraved on the tombstone: Bruce Wayne. The sight of his own grave struck him like a blow to the chest. He stared at the stone, his mind reeling. The future. This was his fate. To die alone, buried in the cold ground, with no one left to carry on his legacy. The realization gripped him, tightening like a vice around his heart. "No," Bruce whispered, shaking his head. "This isn't how it ends." Death stood silently beside him, unmoving, its presence cold and indifferent. It didn't need to speak to convey its message. The grave said everything Bruce needed to know. Bruce's gaze moved from the tombstone to the grave itself. As if drawn by some invisible force, he stepped closer, his feet crunching softly in the snow. The open grave beckoned him, dark and endless, like a black hole ready to swallow him whole. His heart pounded in his chest, the weight of the future pressing down on him like never before. As he approached the edge of the grave, Bruce's knees buckled. He fell to the ground, his hands sinking into the cold, wet earth. He peered into the pit, staring down into the abyss, and his mind was flooded with a terrible, overwhelming realization. This was his end. He could fight 1,000 criminals, face every villain Gotham had to offer, but no amount of training, no amount of strength could defeat death. It would come for him eventually, just as it came for everyone. And in the end, everything he had built, everything Batman had stood for, would be buried with him. But it wasn't just his own death that terrified him. It was what came after. The scene around him shifted again. Gotham once more appeared before his eyes, but this was a future Gotham. Dark, cold, and broken. The city had fallen into ruin. Buildings lay in shambles. Streets were deserted, and crime ran rampant, unchecked. Fires burned in the distance, casting a hellish glow over the abandoned streets. There were no heroes left to defend Gotham. No Batman, no Robin, no Nightwing. The villains had taken control, each one carving out their own piece of the city. The Joker, Riddler, Bane, and Two-Face all held dominion over parts of Gotham, ruling with fear and brutality. Bruce's heart sank as he watched the devastation unfold. Without him, without Batman, Gotham had collapsed. It had become everything he had fought to prevent, a city of chaos, ruled by those who thrived in the darkness. The scene shifted once more, and Bruce found himself standing in Wayne Manor, or at least what remained of it. The grand mansion was in ruins, its once proud walls crumbling under the weight of time and neglect. The Batcave hidden beneath was dark and empty, its halls echoing with the memories of battles long past. Bruce could see it all. The bat signal, dark and cold. The gadgets and suits covered in dust and decay. It was as if his legacy had been erased, forgotten in the relentless march of time. The future was bleak, hopeless, and Bruce's heart ached with the realization that he had failed. He turned to Death, his voice low and desperate. "Is this the future that awaits me? Is this the price I pay for being Batman?" death remained silent, its skeletal form looming in the shadows. But Bruce knew the answer. He had dedicated his life to Gotham, to fighting crime, to being Batman. But in the end, it would cost him everything. His life, his legacy, and even the city he had sworn to protect. "No," Bruce whispered, his voice trembling. "There has to be another way." As if in response, the ground beneath him shifted. The grave, his grave, yawned wide, the earth collapsing inward as it pulled him down. Bruce gasped, his hands scrabbling at the edge of the pit as he was dragged into the cold, dark earth. The weight of the future pressed down on him, suffocating him, crushing him. "No," Bruce shouted, struggling against the pull of the grave. "I won't let it end like this." But the darkness was relentless. The cold earth closed in around him, burying him deeper and deeper until he could no longer see the sky. The weight of the soil pressed down on his chest, filling his lungs with panic. Bruce's mind raced. He had to get out. He had to escape. He couldn't die here. Not like this. With a final surge of strength, Bruce pushed against the suffocating earth, clawing his way upward. His muscles burned, his breath came in ragged gasps, but he refused to stop. Slowly, inch by inch, he pulled himself free from the grave, his body breaking through the surface of the cold, snow-covered ground. Gasping for air, Bruce collapsed on the edge of the grave, his body shaking with exhaustion. He had escaped. He had defied the future. But as he lay there, staring up at the sky, something strange happened. His vision blurred, and the world around him began to shift. The cemetery faded, the darkness lifting, and Bruce felt something change deep within him. He was no longer Batman. He was Bruce Wayne. The transformation was subtle but profound. For the first time in years, Bruce felt the weight of the cowl lift from his shoulders. He felt human again, vulnerable, but also free. He rose to his feet, his breath coming in slow, steady waves. The future he had seen was not set in stone. He could change it. He could balance the identities of Bruce Wayne and Batman, and he could live, truly live, without being consumed by the darkness. As the world around him began to brighten, Bruce turned to Death, who still stood silently by the grave. "I understand now," Bruce said quietly. "It's not too late." Death nodded once, its form slowly dissolving into the snow. Bruce Wayne awoke with a start, his chest heaving as the last remnants of the dream clung to his mind. He blinked, disoriented, his heart still pounding from the visions he had seen. The soft light of dawn filtered through the windows of Wayne Manor, casting a warm glow over the room. It was Christmas morning. Bruce sat up in bed, rubbing his eyes as the weight of the night's revelations settled over him. The ghosts, the visions, had shown him what he had refused to see for so long. He had been trapped in the identity of Batman, allowing it to consume him. But now he had a chance to change. For the first time in years, Bruce felt a sense of peace. He rose from the bed, his gaze drifting to the window, where the snow fell softly outside. Gotham was still out there, still in need of protection, but Bruce knew now that he didn't have to carry the weight of the world on his shoulders alone. He could be Batman, but he could also be Bruce Wayne, and for the first time in a long time, that thought didn't scare him.